The morning sun, usually a comforting glow filtering through my bedroom window, felt strangely accusatory. My throat was parched, a desert in my mouth, and I stumbled towards the kitchen, already picturing the cool water from the tap. I turned the knob, waited. Nothing. Not a trickle, not a drip, just a hollow, echoing silence from the pipes. My heart gave a surprised lurch. Had a pipe burst? Was there a citywide outage? A quick check on my phone showed no alerts, no news flashes about water problems in Harmony Hills. I tried the bathroom sink, then the garden hose out back. Bone dry. Every faucet in my house was dead, a complete and utter silence where the comforting gush of water should be. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at my skin. Then, I saw it. Tucked neatly under the wiper of my car, a crisp, white envelope with the dreaded HOA logo in the corner. My stomach clenched. It couldn't be. Not this. I tore it open, my eyes scanning for the bolded words. And there they were, stark and brutal: water service interruption. Effective immediately. The reason stated was a vague, persistent violation of community guidelines, and a threat of further action for noncompliance. My blood ran cold, then boiled. Mrs. Peterson. It had to be that woman. She wasn't just sending fines anymore, she'd gone too far. She had dared to shut off my water. My own, personal water supply. The audacity of it, the sheer, petty vindictiveness, stole my breath. It wasn't just about a disagreement over garden gnomes or lawn height anymore. This was a direct attack on my right to live comfortably in my own home. A strange calm settled over me, a stillness born from absolute fury. Fine, Mrs. Peterson. You want to play dirty? I can play dirtier. I grabbed my phone, not to call the HOA, not to argue, but to make a different kind of call. A call that would change everything. Within weeks, my roof was a mosaic of gleaming solar panels, buzzing with quiet efficiency. My house became an island, self-sufficient, completely off the grid for power, and with a newly installed well and filtration system, my water was my own, pure and unmolested by the HOA's tyrannical grasp. While the rest of Harmony Hills continued to pay their ever-increasing HOA fees, including their share for the community's rising utility costs. Costs that my departure would subtly but significantly inflate, my own bills dwindled to almost nothing. They had tried to leave me high and dry, but I had made myself an oasis. And soon, very soon, the HOA, specifically Mrs. Peterson, would feel the financial squeeze. They would be left metaphorically parched, scrambling to understand why their budget was suddenly tighter, why their control was slipping, and why a single act of spite had backfired so spectacularly. What they didn't know was that my simple act of self-preservation was about to cause a cascading effect that would leave them truly, deeply thirsty for answers they wouldn't find so easily. The journey to that morning, when my water flow died and my resolve solidified, had been a slow, insidious creep. It began almost 2 years prior, when I, Alex Miller, first moved into my quaint little house in Harmony Hills. The neighborhood, with its tree-lined streets, manicured lawns, and cheerful American flags waving from every porch, seemed like the perfect slice of suburban paradise. I was a quiet person, content with my small hobbies, tending to a modest garden, reading on my porch swing, and occasionally baking cookies for my new neighbors. I believed in community, in looking out for one another, and in the simple joy of a shared smile or a helping hand. My dream was to build a peaceful life, perhaps offering a friendly wave to passers-by or sharing my surplus tomatoes with anyone who fancied them. My first interaction with the Harmony Hills Homeowners Association was a polite, almost welcoming letter. It outlined the general rules: keep your lawn mowed, don't park on the street overnight, respect quiet hours. All seemed reasonable. Then came the second letter, less welcoming, concerning my mailbox. I had, in a moment of playful impulse, painted a small, almost invisible bluebird on the side of it, matching a tiny birdhouse I had put up. The letter, signed by Mrs. Eleanor Peterson, president of the HOA, stated that the color was not within approved aesthetic guidelines and requested immediate rectification. I chuckled, thinking it was a minor oversight. I painted over the bird. No big deal. Kindness, I believed, always smoothed things over. But Mrs. Peterson wasn't looking for smooth. She was looking for control. Her house, the largest and most meticulously kept on the block, sat at the end of the cul-de-sac like a watchful sentinel. She was a woman of impeccable posture, always dressed in crisp, sensible blouses and slacks, her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her eyes, often magnified by her small, wire-rimmed glasses, seemed to miss nothing. When she walked her tiny poodle, Precious, it wasn't a leisurely stroll. It was a patrol, a silent inspection of every lawn, every porch, every parked car. My next violation was my petunias. I loved bright, cheerful flowers, and my front flower bed bloomed with a riot of purples, pinks, and yellows. One afternoon, a stern-faced Mrs. Peterson appeared on my doorstep. Precious, nestled in her arm, looked equally disapproving. "Mr. Miller," she began, her voice a precise, clipped tone, "your petunias. While lovely, they are, shall we say, a touch exuberant." Section 4b, subsection 3 of our landscaping bylaws states, "Flowerbeds shall maintain a uniform height not exceeding 12 inches for perennial and annual plantings to ensure visual harmony throughout the community." Yours, I'm afraid, are closer to 14. And the color palette, while vibrant, is rather distracting. I blinked. Distracting? They were flowers. My neighbor, Mr. Henderson, a kind old man who lived next door, had even complimented them just that morning. "Mrs. Peterson," I began, trying to keep my voice light, "I apologize if they're a bit tall. I can trim them back a little, but I really enjoy the splash of color." She merely pursed her lips. "Compliance is not optional, Mr. Miller. A formal notice will follow. You have 3 days to rectify the situation." And with a curt nod, she turned on her heel, Precious giving one last, surprisingly loud yip of agreement. That was the pattern. Small, seemingly insignificant infractions, followed by formal notices, each one chipping away at my peace. I was fined for leaving my garden hose coiled on the lawn for more than an hour after watering. I received a notice about the excessive number of bird feeders in my backyard. I had 2 small ones, attracting tiny finches and cardinals. The absurdity of it all was almost comical, but the underlying tension wasn't. Other neighbors, like poor Mrs. Davison down the street, who had received a fine for a single fallen leaf from her oak tree obstructing pedestrian pathways, seemed to cower in fear of Mrs. Peterson's wrath. They offered me sympathetic glances, sometimes a whispered, "Hang in there," but no one dared to openly challenge the HOA president. I tried to be the bigger person. When Mrs. Peterson's car battery died in her driveway, I offered to jump-start it, even though she was the cause of my constant headaches. She looked at me with suspicion, as if my kindness were a veiled trap. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Miller," she said, her voice stiff. "My roadside assistance will arrive shortly." She chose to wait for an hour in the sweltering heat rather than accept a simple act of neighborly goodwill. It was then I realized her desire for control was so absolute, it outweighed even basic human connection. The lows of this period were the constant, nagging feeling of being watched, the knowledge that any small deviation from the HOA's increasingly stringent rules would result in a punitive letter. The highs were rare, small victories, a particularly vibrant batch of tomatoes that I shared with Mr. Henderson, who thanked me with genuine warmth, or a quiet wave from Mrs. Davison, a shared understanding of our predicament. But these moments of human connection felt like fleeting oases in a desert of regulations. The conflict escalated dramatically when I decided to adopt a rescue dog, a sweet, clumsy golden retriever mix I named Gus. Gus was a gentle giant, a lover of belly rubs and long walks. My backyard, while not huge, was perfectly adequate, and I had installed a small, tasteful, regulation-compliant fence. Gus loved to lounge on a patch of sun-warmed grass near the fence, watching the squirrels. One sunny afternoon, I received yet another HOA notice, but this one felt different, colder. It wasn't about Gus's barking, he barely ever barked, or about his waist, I was meticulous. It was about his presence. The letter stated, in no uncertain terms, that outdoor pets must be confined to a kennel or a fully enclosed, non-visible run when unsupervised in the backyard to maintain neighborhood aesthetics and property values. It cited an obscure clause about visual clutter and unpredictable animal movement detracting from uniform landscaping. This was a direct attack on Gus's simple joy, his right to stretch out in the sun. It meant building a giant, ugly, wooden box, essentially caging him in my own yard. My kindness, my patience, my empathy, they all began to fray at the edges. I had followed every other ridiculous rule. I had trimmed my petunias, removed a bird feeder, even repainted my mailbox 3 times to find the perfect shade of white. But this? This was personal. This was about Gus, my sweet, harmless companion. I wrote a polite but firm letter back, explaining that Gus was well behaved, that the fence was regulation height, and that forcing him into an enclosed run was inhumane and unnecessary. I even included a photo of Gus looking utterly angelic. The response was swift and brutal. Not another letter, but a certified mail package containing a formal summons to an HOA board meeting, specifically to address Mr. Miller's flagrant disregard for established pet containment guidelines. The fine attached to the summons was exorbitant, threatening to increase daily if I didn't comply. It was clear, Mrs. Peterson wasn't just nitpicking anymore. She was making an example of me. She saw my quiet nature, my attempts at being a good neighbor, as weakness. She was trying to break me. I attended the meeting, tried to reason, tried to appeal to their sense of decency. Mrs. Peterson sat at the head of the table, flanked by 2 silently nodding board members, her face a mask of unyielding authority. She didn't listen to my explanations, she merely read from the rulebook. My plea for Gus's simple happiness was met with a cold lecture on community standards and preserving the integrity of Harmony Hills. I felt a profound sense of helplessness. I complied, grudgingly, building a small, unsightly enclosure for Gus, a testament to the HOA's oppressive power. Gus, bless his heart, still tried to enjoy it, but I could see the spark dim in his eyes. My empathy was wearing thin, replaced by a growing resentment. Then came the true turning point, the event that pushed me over the edge, away from quiet compliance and towards open defiance. It was a scorching summer, and the cost of water in our region had skyrocketed due to a prolonged drought. Harmony Hills had a peculiar water system. While each house had its own meter for individual usage, the HOA managed a community well that supplemented the city water, especially for irrigation of common areas and, critically, a booster pump system that ensured good water pressure for all homes. The cost of running this community system was folded into the monthly HOA fees. One sweltering afternoon, Mrs. Peterson sent out a community-wide email, announcing a new water conservation initiative. It sounded benevolent enough, but the details were chilling. It stated that individual household water usage would now be monitored closely, and any household exceeding a new, drastically low daily limit would incur severe penalties, including potential, temporary suspension of access to the community booster pump system. This meant that while city water might still trickle through, the glorious pressure I relied on for a decent shower or to fill a kiddie pool for Gus would be gone. It was a thinly veiled threat, a new tool of control, clearly designed to punish those, like me, who might use more water for, say, keeping a few plants alive or giving a dog a much-needed cool-down. I was furious. It felt like she was rationing my life, molecule by molecule. I was already conserving, but her new limit was practically unlivable. I tried to argue, pointing out that some homes had larger families, or older pipes, or simply needed more water for legitimate reasons. My arguments fell on deaf ears. The HOA board, under Mrs. Peterson's iron grip, approved the new policy with lightning speed. The final straw came with another official notice, bold and underlined, stating that due to consistent, unexplained high water consumption, a blatant lie, as my consumption was perfectly normal, just above her arbitrary new limit, my individual access to the community booster pump system would be disconnected in 72 hours. This was not just a threat, it was a promise. It meant my water pressure would drop to a pathetic trickle, making everyday tasks a struggle. It was a declaration of war, and it ignited a fire within me that Mrs. Peterson had, perhaps, never anticipated. The kindness and empathy I had tried to maintain for so long evaporated, replaced by a steely resolve. If she wanted to play a game of control, I would show her just how little control she truly had. I started researching. Not about appealing her decision, not about fighting the fine. But about wells. About solar. About becoming an island, completely independent. The seed of rebellion had been planted, and it was about to bloom into something spectacular. The announcement that my water pressure would be cut, delivered with Mrs. Peterson's usual icy formality, struck me not as a defeat, but as a challenge. My initial fury had cooled into a hard, bright determination. I wouldn't just deal with this, I would transcend it. This wasn't about winning a petty argument anymore, it was about reclaiming my autonomy, ensuring that no HOA, no Mrs. Peterson, could ever hold such power over my home again. The very next day, I began my quiet revolution. My first step was to research. I spent hours online, poring over forums about off-grid living, solar power, and well drilling. The amount of information was overwhelming at first, but I quickly focused on what was relevant to my situation. I learned about different types of solar panels, battery storage systems, and the complex process of drilling a private well. It quickly became clear this wasn't a small undertaking. It would be expensive, time-consuming, and probably quite visible, which meant more clashes with the HOA. But the thought of never again receiving a notice about my excessive water use or my distracting petunias filled me with a quiet thrill. This wasn't just about spite, it was about freedom. I found a local company, Sunnyside Solutions, specializing in residential solar and well systems. Their representative, a friendly, bearded man named Ray, came out to my house a few days later. He listened patiently as I explained my situation, carefully omitting the more dramatic details about Mrs. Peterson's reign. I simply said I was looking to reduce my carbon footprint and gain energy independence. Ray nodded, understanding. He walked around my property, measuring the roof, checking the soil, and assessing the best spots for panels and a well. His estimate was hefty, a significant chunk of my savings, but I saw it as an investment in my peace of mind. He assured me they could handle all the permits and regulations, a crucial detail in an HOA-controlled neighborhood. "We've worked in Harmony Hills before," he said, a knowing twinkle in his eye. "We know how to navigate the local governance." While the paperwork for the solar and well installations began, the HOA's threat became a reality. Exactly 72 hours after I received that notice, my shower became a pathetic dribble. Filling a pot for cooking took ages. Flushing the toilet felt like a test of patience. It was annoying, humiliating even, but it only strengthened my resolve. I had to ration my water, taking quick, cold showers, using bottled water for drinking, and collecting rainwater in buckets for my garden. Gus seemed confused by the change, looking up at me with sad eyes when his kiddie pool remained empty. This daily struggle was a constant, stark reminder of Mrs. Peterson's power, and it fueled my secret mission. One afternoon, a large truck from Sunnyside Solutions arrived in front of my house. The team began unloading equipment, pipes, drilling rigs, and what looked like a giant metal screw. Mrs. Peterson, alerted by the noise or perhaps by her internal radar for anything unapproved, was at her window, a silhouette of disapproval. Soon enough, she was marching across her lawn, Precious trotting dutifully beside her. "Mr. Miller," she called, her voice as sharp as glass. "What, precisely, is the meaning of this commotion?" I turned, affecting a casual air, though my heart was hammering. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Peterson. Just having some work done on my property. Routine maintenance." She narrowed her eyes, scanning the equipment. "This hardly looks routine. Is this a new landscaping project? There are strict guidelines, you know. And I see no permit posted." Ray, sensing the tension, stepped forward. "Ma'am, we're installing a residential well and solar power system. All necessary permits have been filed with the county. We're simply waiting for the final sign-off, which should come through any day now." Mrs. Peterson's face tightened. Her mouth opened, then closed. A well? Solar? This was beyond her usual purview of petunias and mailboxes. This was structural, foundational, completely outside the typical HOA rules about external aesthetics. Her usual spiel about community standards felt weak in the face of county-approved construction. It was a rare moment when she seemed genuinely flustered, caught off guard. This was for me, a small taste of victory. "Well," she stammered, regaining a fraction of her composure, "I shall, of course, verify this with the county myself. And I expect all work to comply with noise ordinances and keep disruption to a minimum." She spun around, her indignation radiating from her stiff shoulders, and marched back to her house. Ray winked at me. "She'll be back," he whispered, but at least the initial shock registered. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. The drilling for the well was loud, a constant rhythmic thudding that echoed through the neighborhood. Neighbors peered out their windows, some with curiosity, others with thinly veiled concern. I waved to them, offering a small smile, trying to project an air of normalcy. I knew the noise was a low for the general peace of the neighborhood, but it was a necessary part of my plan. I occasionally saw Mrs. Peterson watching from her window, her face a thundercloud. She sent one more formal notice about excessive noise, but it was quickly dismissed because the work was permitted and within legal hours. She was losing her grip, and she knew it. Then came the solar panels. The installation was faster, less noisy, but far more visible. The gleaming, dark rectangles on my roof were a stark contrast to the uniform, shingled houses around me. I had chosen a sleek, low-profile design, but there was no hiding them. They were a beacon of my defiance, a quiet declaration of independence for everyone to see. Mr. Henderson gave me a thumbs up one day while I was in my yard. Mrs. Davison even brought over a plate of cookies, whispering, "Good for you, Alex." Someone needed to stand up to her. These small gestures of support, rare as they were, buoyed my spirits. It reminded me that there were still kind people in Harmony Hills, living under the same oppressive thumb. My internal water system was installed next. A large tank went into my basement, connected to the newly drilled well and a robust filtration system. The pipes were rerouted, separating my house's water supply entirely from the community booster pump system. My water meter, once a silent tattletale for the HOA, now merely measured what little city water I might occasionally use, a backup for my well. When the Sunnyside Solutions team finally finished, they turned on my outdoor spigot. A strong, steady stream of clear, cold water gushed out. I let it run for a moment, simply enjoying the sound, the sight of it. It felt like freedom, pure and undeniable. Gus came over, nosed the stream, then happily lapped at a puddle. I grinned, giving him a scratch behind the ears. The final piece of the puzzle was connecting the solar panels to my house's electrical system, complete with a battery bank that would store excess energy. My electricity bill, which had been a consistent annoyance, now plummeted to almost zero. I was fully off-grid for power and water. I had done it. I was independent. The true high of this period was the day I received the final inspection approvals, crisp and official, stating that my solar and well systems were fully compliant with all county regulations. I almost wanted to frame them and send a copy to Mrs. Peterson. But I resisted. The real impact would be felt, not declared. As my house hummed with the quiet efficiency of its new systems, extreme event unfolded in the broader community, an event that would expose the HOA's increasing reliance on my old, shared contributions. A few days after my systems were fully operational, a notice from the HOA landed in every mailbox, announcing an emergency meeting. The tone was unusually urgent, almost panicked. It spoke of unforeseen financial burdens, unexpected increases in communal utility costs, and the need for a temporary, but significant, increase in monthly HOA dues. The notice didn't explain why these costs had suddenly spiked, but the timing was suspiciously coincidental with my off-grid transition. My water consumption and electricity usage, once significant portions of the shared utility budget managed by the HOA, were now entirely my own. The burden of maintaining the community well and the booster pump system, the very system Mrs. Peterson had used to punish me, now fell more heavily on everyone else, without my contribution. The implication was clear, though unspoken: my departure from the shared system, while perfectly legal, had created a hole in their budget. The other homeowners, who had once silently watched my struggles, were now facing the direct financial consequences of the HOA's short-sightedness and Mrs. Peterson's punitive actions. The meeting promised to be tense, with whispers already spreading through the neighborhood. Mrs. Peterson was about to face a far angrier crowd than she had ever anticipated, a crowd that now felt the pinch directly in their wallets. And she still didn't truly understand why. The emergency HOA meeting was less a meeting and more a public execution, though Mrs. Peterson didn't seem to realize she was the one on the chopping block. The community clubhouse, usually reserved for polite bridge games and quiet book club discussions, buzzed with an angry energy I'd never witnessed before. Every seat was taken, and people stood along the walls, their faces grim. When Mrs. Peterson, her usual severe bun slightly askew, called the meeting to order, her voice, usually so commanding, seemed to crack under the collective gaze of disgruntled homeowners. She began by explaining the unforeseen budget deficit, blaming it on a rise in utility costs and the need for capital improvements to the community well system. She spoke in vague terms, using buzzwords like fiscal responsibility and long-term sustainability, but avoided any direct mention of why these costs had suddenly escalated so sharply. She then dropped the bombshell: a 25% increase in monthly HOA dues, effective immediately. A collective gasp, then an uproar, filled the room. 25%, shouted a voice from the back. What in the world happened? Mrs. Peterson held up a hand, trying to restore order. As I said, unforeseen circumstances. The cost of maintaining our shared infrastructure has simply risen. But why now? Mrs. Peterson called out a different voice, belonging to David Jenkins, a friendly, outspoken neighbor who lived a few doors down. My dues just went up last year. And suddenly, poof, we need another quarter of our payment just like that? Mrs. Peterson's gaze flickered to me for a fleeting second, then away. She tried to explain about pump maintenance and fluctuating electricity rates, but her words sounded hollow. She couldn't admit the real reason without exposing her own punitive actions. My decision to go off-grid meant that the shared costs for the community well and booster pump system, previously distributed among all homes, now fell entirely on the remaining households. My usage, which had been calculated into the total, was gone, but the fixed costs of running the system remained, forcing everyone else to pick up my former share. It was a classic tragedy of the commons, playing out right before her eyes, one she had inadvertently orchestrated. The meeting spiraled into chaos. People started sharing their own stories of Mrs. Peterson's petty tyrannies, fines for unapproved garden decorations, threats over kids' chalk drawings on sidewalks, even a dispute over the height of a garden gnome. It was clear the budget increase was the final straw, unleashing years of pent-up frustration. This was a massive high for me, witnessing her losing control, but it was also a low for the community, as the financial burden was real for many families. I sat quietly, observing, feeling a strange mix of vindication and a touch of sadness for my neighbors. I had escaped the direct impact, but they hadn't. Mr. Henderson, my elderly neighbor, raised his hand shakily. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, his voice soft but clear, "didn't Mr. Miller go off the grid recently? With his own well and solar panels? Wouldn't that change our shared utility calculations significantly?" A hush fell over the room. All eyes turned to me, then to Mrs. Peterson. Her face went beet red. "Mr. Miller's personal choices are his own business," she snapped, deflecting. "They have no bearing on the entire community's shared expenses." It was a lie, and everyone in that room, now connecting the dots, seemed to know it. Her inability to offer a transparent explanation, combined with her obvious discomfort, sealed her fate. The meeting ended abruptly, with Mrs. Peterson effectively shouted down and a vote of no confidence proposed for the next official board meeting. It was an extreme event, a complete collapse of her authority. She stormed out, Precious yapping furiously in her arms, leaving a bewildered, angry crowd behind. My neighbors, many of whom had been too timid to speak up before, now flocked around me. "You're a genius, Alex." David Jenkins clapped me on the back. "She cut off your water, and you made her pay for it." I simply smiled, not wanting to reveal the extent of my plan or how precisely my self-sufficiency had impacted their shared costs. I tried to pivot the conversation back to the community's immediate needs, urging them to hold the board accountable. I was subtly trying to guide them towards a solution that would benefit everyone, not just me. This was part of my long-term goal, not just to escape Mrs. Peterson's grasp, but to inspire a fairer, kinder community. The days following the meeting were tense. Mrs. Peterson became a recluse, rarely seen outside her house. Her patrols stopped. The HOA office, usually buzzing with her stern presence, seemed eerily quiet. This low period was a strange calm after the storm, a time for the dust to settle, but I knew it wouldn't last. A wounded animal is often the most dangerous, and Mrs. Peterson was a wounded lioness, stripped of her pride and power. During this time, I decided to focus on community building, a subtle counternarrative to Mrs. Peterson's reign of fear. I started a small, neighborhood help group chat for Harmony Hills residents, offering my skills for minor repairs, gardening advice, or even just pet sitting. My solar panels generated more electricity than I used, especially on sunny days, and I found myself with a surplus of energy. I began thinking about how I could use this to help others, without directly selling power to the grid, which would invite more HOA scrutiny. One evening, Mr. Henderson called me. His air conditioning had gone out, and with the summer heat still oppressive, his house was becoming unbearable. He was on a fixed income, and a new AC unit was financially out of reach. This was a classic low moment for a kind neighbor, a moment where empathy was crucial. "Alex," he rasped, "I don't know what to do. It's like an oven in here." My mind raced. My solar system was humming, producing more than enough power. I couldn't just give him electricity directly, that was too complex and potentially illegal without the right setup. But I could help in other ways. "Mr. Henderson," I said, "I have a few powerful portable fans. And my house is usually very cool thanks to my new setup. Why don't you come over and stay with me for a few days? At least until you can figure out the AC. And I can help you look into repair options." He sounded hesitant, but also desperate. "Are you sure, Alex? I don't want to be a bother." "Absolutely sure," I insisted. "It would be my pleasure. Gus would love the company too." So, for 3 days, Mr. Henderson stayed at my house. He marveled at the cool air, the strong water pressure from my well, and the quiet efficiency of my solar panels. He saw firsthand the freedom I had gained. We talked for hours, about his life, about the old Harmony Hills, about his struggles with the HOA. He told me stories of how Mrs. Peterson had slowly squeezed the joy out of the neighborhood, turning friendly gatherings into suspicious glances. He even cautiously admitted that the water pressure issue he'd been having for months had mysteriously disappeared after my systems went online, implying that my previous heavy use of the community booster pump was actually helping everyone's pressure. It was ironic, and a powerful realization. Her spite had not only backfired on her financially but had also subtly degraded the very community system she claimed to protect. My removal from the system meant less overall draw on the pump, yes, but it also meant the pump wasn't operating at its peak efficiency because it wasn't being utilized as fully as before, or perhaps it was revealing underlying issues that my usage had masked. This shared experience with Mr. Henderson was a significant high. It wasn't about fighting the HOA directly, but about building genuine connections and demonstrating the power of self-sufficiency. It subtly showcased the advantages of being independent, without me having to preach or boast. When Mr. Henderson's AC was finally repaired, I helped him find a trustworthy and affordable technician, even contributing a small amount myself. Anonymously, he left with a renewed spirit, a quiet ally in the making. But Mrs. Peterson wasn't done. The humiliation of the emergency meeting and the whispers of discontent had festered. She couldn't attack my solar panels or my well directly, as they were permitted. She couldn't touch my water or electricity. So, she went for something else, something she believed was still within her grasp, something that would target my beloved Gus and, by extension, me. A week after Mr. Henderson moved back home, another notice arrived. This one was different. It wasn't about a fine or a past violation. It was an official amendment to the HOA bylaws, seemingly passed in a secret, hastily called board meeting, with no notice to the community. The new rule was shockingly specific and clearly aimed squarely at me and Gus. No large breed dogs, defined as over 50 pounds, are permitted as permanent residents within Harmony Hills community boundaries due to perceived strain on common area resources and potential nuisance. Gus was 65 pounds of pure love. This wasn't just a new rule. It was a blatant attempt to force me to give up my dog. It was an extreme event, a low blow, designed to hit me where I was most vulnerable, a desperate act of a woman clinging to the last vestiges of her power. The new rule about large dogs hit me like a physical blow. Gus, my gentle, loving Gus, suddenly deemed a nuisance and a strain on common area resources? It was so obviously directed at him, and by extension, at me, a desperate attempt by Mrs. Peterson to regain control after her public humiliation. My blood ran cold, then simmered with a quiet rage. This wasn't about regulations anymore, this was personal, an attack on my family. I immediately tried to find information about this secret board meeting. There had been no public notice, no opportunity for community input, which was a clear violation of the HOA's own bylaws. This was a classic, low event, a moment of deep frustration and anger, but it also solidified my resolve. I couldn't let Mrs. Peterson get away with this. Gus was not just a pet, he was family, a source of comfort and joy. My first step was to call David Jenkins, the outspoken neighbor from the emergency meeting. "Did you hear about this new dog rule, David?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even. "Are you kidding, Alex? It's absurd." "Everyone knows it's about Gus," he replied, his voice filled with indignation. "My sister has a Labrador just a few blocks over, and she's worried sick this might spread." David agreed to help me rally the neighbors. We started a petition, going door to door, explaining the illegality of the new bylaw amendment and the injustice of it. Many neighbors, still smarting from the sudden HOA fee increase and witnessing Mrs. Peterson's increasing overreach, were eager to sign. Even people who didn't own large dogs understood the dangerous precedent this set. If the HOA could arbitrarily ban large dogs today, what other personal freedoms would they strip away tomorrow? We gathered dozens of signatures, a powerful show of community disapproval. This collaborative effort with my neighbors felt like a a tangible sign of unity against Mrs. Peterson's tyranny. It wasn't just my fight anymore. Mrs. Peterson, however, remained unyielding. She refused to acknowledge the petition or meet with concerned residents. She sent me a formal notice, demanding Gus be removed from the premises within 30 days or face escalating fines and potential legal action. The letter felt smug, a final victory in her eyes. It was a stark reminder of the power she still wielded, even if her authority was crumbling. This was a significant blow, making the threat against Gus feel very real and immediate. But I wasn't going to back down. I reached out to a lawyer specializing in HOA disputes. His name was Mr. Harrison, a no-nonsense man with a sharp mind and a quiet, reassuring demeanor. He listened intently to my story, from the petunias to the water shut off, and finally, to the outrageous dog ban. This is a clear case of selective enforcement and improper amendment of bylaws, Mr. Miller, Mr. Harrison stated, reviewing the documents I'd brought. The HOA cannot simply conjure up new rules without proper notice and a community vote. And singling out your dog is highly suspect. He advised me to send a formal legal challenge to the HOA, demanding the immediate repeal of the new bylaw amendment and threatening a lawsuit if they did not comply. The legal letter, drafted by Mr. Harrison, was a stern, detailed document, citing specific sections of state law and the HOA's own governing documents that Mrs. Peterson had violated. This was a major, a direct and powerful counterstrike using the rules she claimed to uphold. The legal letter landed like a bomb in the HOA office. I could almost picture Mrs. Peterson's face as she read it, her rigid composure surely cracking. For a few days, there was a tense silence. Then, a response came. It wasn't from Mrs. Peterson, but from the HOA's own legal counsel. The letter was conciliatory, apologetic even, stating that the large dog amendment would be temporarily suspended for further review and inviting me to a special, properly noticed HOA board meeting to discuss the matter. It was a partial victory, a retreat, but not a full surrender. This was a low in the sense that they hadn't completely given in, but a high because it showed my legal action had forced their hand. The special HOA board meeting was scheduled for a week later. Word spread through the neighborhood, and anticipation was high. Many neighbors who had signed the petition planned to attend, offering moral support. This growing sense of community, the shared desire for a fair and transparent HOA, was truly inspiring. It contrasted sharply with the fear and isolation that Mrs. Peterson had cultivated for so long. During this waiting period, I continued to reinforce my independent life. My solar panels hummed reliably, and my well provided an endless supply of clean, strong water. I discovered that by carefully managing my energy usage, I could even charge my electric car exclusively with solar power, completely cutting ties with the grid for my transportation too. This added layer of self-sufficiency felt incredibly empowering, a quiet triumph in the face of ongoing adversity. Gus, blissfully unaware of the legal battle being waged for his right to exist in Harmony Hills, enjoyed his daily walks and sunbathing sessions, his presence a constant reminder of what I was fighting for. The night of the special board meeting arrived. The clubhouse was packed again, even more so than the last time. Mrs. Peterson sat at the head of the table, flanked by two new, nervous-looking board members. Her face was grim, her eyes darting nervously around the room. Mr. Harrison sat beside me, his presence a calm, steady anchor. Mrs. Peterson began, stiffly reading a prepared statement. She acknowledged the procedural irregularities in the previous amendment and announced the board's decision to rescind the large dog bylaw, pending further community discussion. A ripple of quiet cheers went through the room. This was a significant, a clear victory for Gus and for the community's fight against arbitrary rules. But then, Mrs. Peterson, ever the one to snatch defeat from the jaws of a concession, couldn't resist a final jab. However, she stated, her voice regaining a hint of its former imperiousness, the board finds it necessary to address the significant and unforeseen strain on our community's shared resources. The recent, substantial increase in utility costs, particularly for the community well and booster pump system, necessitates a reassessment of our financial model. As such, to compensate for these rising expenses, and to ensure fairness across all households, the board has voted to implement a new annual, Community Infrastructure Contribution fee, to be levied on all properties within Harmony Hills. This fee is non-negotiable and will be collected with your next quarterly dues. She paused, then delivered the final, chilling detail. This fee will also apply to properties that are entirely off-grid for utilities, as they still benefit from shared community amenities and infrastructure, such as road maintenance, common area landscaping, and the availability of the community well system as a backup, should their personal systems fail. My heart sank. This was it. She couldn't get me on the water, or the power, or Gus. So she created a brand new fee, specifically designed to extract money from me, to make me pay for the very communal system she had tried to deny me. It was an extreme event, a new low, a desperate attempt to recoup her losses and reassert her dominance. She was trying to make my self-sufficiency expensive, to punish me for my independence, making me pay for something I no longer used, simply because I resided in Harmony Hills. The room, which had just celebrated a victory, now buzzed with confused, angry whispers. Mrs. Peterson's announcement of the new Community Infrastructure Contribution fee hung in the air, a thick, suffocating cloud. It was a thinly veiled attempt to claw back what she felt she had lost because of my independence. The room, which had just celebrated the victory for Gus, now erupted in murmurs of disbelief and outrage. This was an extreme event, a low blow designed to make my self-sufficiency cost me money I shouldn't have to pay. It was a tax on freedom, a penalty for not being beholden to the HOA's failing system. Mr. Harrison, sitting beside me, leaned in. She's playing dirty, Alex. This is a direct response to your solar and well. They can't force you to use their utilities, so they're trying to make you pay for them anyway, under a different name. His voice was calm, but I could feel his professional indignation. But it's absurd, I whispered back. I don't use their water or their shared electricity anymore. Why should I pay for its availability? Because, he explained, they'll argue it benefits common areas like roads, streetlights, and the peace of mind of having a backup well system, even if you never use it. It's a loophole they're trying to exploit. The meeting dissolved into another heated debate, but this time, Mrs. Peterson had the upper hand. The two new board members, clearly hand-picked by her, echoed her sentiments, citing fiscal responsibility and community fairness. They presented a convoluted spreadsheet that supposedly justified the new fee, but it was clear to anyone with a shred of sense that it was manufactured to target properties like mine. Despite the community's protests, Mrs. Peterson pushed the motion through. The vote was rushed, and the ayes from her loyal, silent few outweighed the confused and angry nays. I walked out of that meeting with a heavy heart, but my resolve remained unbroken. This was a low moment, for sure. The idea of paying a significant annual fee for services I didn't use, just because Mrs. Peterson was spiteful, felt fundamentally wrong. Gus, trotting beside me, seemed to sense my mood, nudging my hand with his wet nose. The next day, new, official notice arrived, detailing the Community Infrastructure Contribution fee. It was substantial, almost as much as my original combined utility and HOA fees. It felt like a deliberate insult, a clear message: you can escape our control, but you can't escape paying us. I immediately called Mr. Harrison. We have to fight this, I told him. This isn't fair. It's just a retaliatory measure. He agreed. We have grounds for a lawsuit, Alex. This is likely an unenforceable, discriminatory fee. But lawsuits take time and money. Are you prepared for that? I thought about it. My savings were depleted from the solar and well installation. But the thought of Mrs. Peterson winning, of her being able to impose such an unfair burden, gnawed at me. Yes, I said. I am. Mr. Harrison began preparing the legal documents to challenge the new fee. This was a high of renewed determination, turning my anger into productive action. He advised me to pay the first installment of the fee, under protest, to avoid immediate late charges and further legal complications while the lawsuit proceeded. It was a bitter pill to swallow, but a necessary strategic blow. While Mr. Harrison navigated the complexities of the legal system, I found myself with a lot of spare time. My independence meant less worry about utility bills, and the legal battle was slow-moving. I decided to use this time to truly invest in my neighborhood, to build the community I had always dreamed of, a direct contrast to Mrs. Peterson's divisive reign. I started small. I noticed Mr. Henderson struggling to trim a tall hedge. I offered to help, using my own battery-powered tools, charged, of course, by my solar panels. He was grateful, and we spent a pleasant afternoon chatting while I worked. Next, I helped Mrs. Davison clean up some storm debris in her yard. Word spread. Soon, I was regularly helping neighbors with small tasks, fixing a leaky faucet, mending a fence, even just moving heavy boxes. These were quiet, highs, moments of genuine connection and kindness that seemed to chip away at the lingering tension in the neighborhood. One day, I noticed a neglected, overgrown patch of land near the community park. It was an eyesore, filled with weeds and discarded trash. I had an idea. I approached the HOA, this time not Mrs. Peterson, but the two less influential board members, who seemed more amenable to reasonable suggestions after the dog bylaw fiasco. I proposed turning the area into a small community garden, a place where neighbors could grow vegetables and flowers together. I offered to lead the project, use my own tools, and even contribute some of my surplus well water for irrigation during the dry spells. The board members were hesitant, wary of Mrs. Peterson's reaction, but the idea of a positive community initiative, one that might win them favor, seemed appealing. They approved it, with the stipulation that I obtain signatures from a majority of the neighbors supporting the idea. This was a low, because it added another hurdle, but it was also a high, because it gave me an opportunity to connect with more people. I went door to door again, this time with a plan for something positive. The response was overwhelmingly enthusiastic. People loved the idea of a shared space, a place to connect and grow their own food. Many offered to help, contributing seeds, tools, and their own time. This was a massive high, witnessing the dormant community spirit reawaken. We started clearing the land. Neighbors of all ages, from young parents with their kids to retirees like Mr. Henderson and Mrs. Davison, came out to help. We worked side by side, laughing, sharing stories, and bonding over shovels and rakes. It was dirty work, but it felt incredibly rewarding. This burgeoning sense of togetherness was the very antidote to Mrs. Peterson's fear-mongering and control. One sunny afternoon, as we were planting the first rows of tomatoes and peppers, a black car pulled up. Mrs. Peterson emerged, her face a thundercloud. She stared at the lively scene, the buzzing activity, the laughter, the shared effort. She had clearly expected us to fail, or for the project to simply fizzle out. Her eyes, usually so sharp, seemed to lose focus for a moment, unable to comprehend this spontaneous, unorganized burst of community. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the cheerful chatter. I was not informed of such a large-scale project. "This is unauthorized." I straightened up, wiping dirt from my hands. "Mrs. Peterson," I said, calmly, "the board approved the community garden. We have majority support from the residents." "We're simply building something wonderful for Harmony Hills." She sputtered, unable to find a suitable bylaw to quote, unable to comprehend a situation where people were actually working together without her direct instruction. This was a significant high for me, seeing her so utterly powerless in the face of genuine community spirit. Just then, David Jenkins, who was raking nearby, stepped forward. "Mrs. Peterson," he said, his voice firm but respectful, "we're doing this for the good of the neighborhood. We're tired of all the fighting. We want Harmony Hills to be a community again, not just a collection of houses with rules." Many other neighbors nodded in agreement, their eyes challenging her. She looked around, her gaze lingering on each face, seeing not fear, but quiet defiance. She seemed to shrink, her usual aura of authority completely gone. This was an extreme event, a crushing blow for her. She had lost her power not just through legal battles, but through the sheer force of human connection she had tried so hard to stifle. She turned, got back in her car, and drove away, a defeated figure. But the fight wasn't truly over. My lawsuit against the Community Infrastructure Contribution fee was still pending. And even though Mrs. Peterson's personal power had waned, the HOA, as an entity, still held sway. The community garden was a success, a symbol of hope and unity, but the financial burden remained. I knew she would try something else, some new, underhanded tactic. The next extreme event, I suspected, wouldn't be a direct attack on me, but a broader, more desperate move to recoup the HOA's financial losses, perhaps at the expense of the entire neighborhood's well-being. Mrs. Peterson's humiliation at the community garden was a personal triumph, a moment where her authority truly crumbled under the weight of genuine neighborly spirit. Yet, the legal battle over the Community Infrastructure Contribution fee dragged on. Mr. Harrison assured me we had a strong case, but the wheels of justice turned slowly, and the HOA's lawyers were determined to draw it out, hoping I'd tire and give up. This legal limbo was a persistent blow, a nagging reminder that the fight wasn't completely over. Meanwhile, Harmony Hills was changing. The community garden flourished, a vibrant hub of activity. More neighbors joined the neighborhood help chat, sharing tools, offering rides, and organizing small block parties. My house, with its humming solar panels and abundant well water, became a quiet symbol of resilience. People would occasionally ask me about the solar system or the well, curious about becoming more self-sufficient themselves. I shared what I learned, offering advice and even helping a few neighbors research their own options. It was inspiring to see this slow, positive shift, a definite high for the neighborhood. But Mrs. Peterson, though less visible, was not idle. Stripped of her petty powers, she retreated into the dark corners of the HOA's financial records. She had lost control over individual residents, but she still had sway over the HOA's budget and, critically, the community's dwindling funds. I had noticed an increase in notices about maintenance issues on common areas, flickering streetlights, overgrown bushes in the park, and even a crack in the clubhouse foundation. These weren't severe problems, but they were being highlighted with increasing urgency, always accompanied by a plea for more funds. It was a classic low event, a subtle campaign of fear-mongering to justify more money. Then came the new, extreme event, the final desperate gambit. A terse, official notice from the HOA was sent to every household, announcing a mandatory, community-wide assessment. Not a fee, not an increase in dues, but a one-time, hefty payment demanded from every homeowner for critical, unforeseen repairs to the community well and booster pump system. The amount was staggering, far more than anything previously requested, and it was to be paid within 30 days. The notice claimed the system was on the brink of failure, threatening that the entire neighborhood would lose water pressure, or even full access to water, if the assessment wasn't paid immediately. This was a direct consequence of her past actions. By cutting off my water, and by losing my financial contribution to the system, the HOA had been forced to shoulder more costs with less income. The underlying issues with the aging well system had likely been ignored or poorly maintained under her leadership, and now they were coming home to roost. This wasn't just a low for me, it was a devastating blow to every family in Harmony Hills. Many people couldn't afford such a huge, sudden payment. Panic rippled through the neighborhood. I immediately called Mr. Harrison. "This is insane," I told him. "They're trying to shake everyone down for a broken system they let fall apart. And they want me to pay for it, even though I don't even use their water." "This is highly irregular, Alex," he confirmed, his voice grave. "A mandatory assessment of this magnitude, with such little notice, without a clear, independent audit of the critical repairs, it screams desperation. And frankly, it's illegal if they can't prove genuine emergency and proper financial management." He immediately filed for an injunction to halt the assessment, arguing that it was arbitrary, punitive, and lacked transparency. The legal fight intensified, becoming more public. The local news caught wind of the story. Harmony Hills HOA demands massive payouts from residents. This was a huge high in terms of public exposure, putting Mrs. Peterson and the HOA under immense scrutiny. The community rallied like never before. Neighbors held impromptu meetings, sharing their financial worries, their anger, and their determination to fight back. The community garden became the unofficial town square, a place where plans were made. We contacted the local news, inviting them to interview residents. Mr. Henderson, Mrs. Davison, David Jenkins, and many others spoke passionately about Mrs. Peterson's overreach, the arbitrary rules, the inflated fees, and now, this impossible assessment. They recounted how the neighborhood spirit had been slowly eroded. The pressure mounted on the HOA board. The two new members, who had seemed so loyal to Mrs. Peterson, started looking increasingly uncomfortable in public. The injunction hearing was fast-tracked, given the financial hardship the assessment would inflict. The hearing was an extreme event, a true showdown. The courtroom was packed with Harmony Hills residents, all there to support our cause. Mrs. Peterson, dressed impeccably but looking frazzled, sat at the defense table with the HOA's lawyers. Mr. Harrison presented our case, detailing the history of the HOA's financial mismanagement, the retaliatory actions against me, and the lack of proper process for the assessment. He highlighted my self-sufficient systems, demonstrating how I had removed myself from the shared burden, only for the HOA to attempt to force me to pay for its failures anyway. He even brought up the irony of her shutting off my water, which led me to seek independence, which then led to their budget woes. Then came the bombshell. Mr. Harrison called a surprise witness, the former treasurer of the Harmony Hills HOA, a timid man named Mr. Thompson, who had resigned abruptly a few months prior, seemingly due to health reasons. Mr. Thompson, looking pale but resolute, testified that Mrs. Peterson had consistently overridden his financial recommendations, approving unnecessary expenses for the HOA office, making questionable investments with community funds, and deliberately delaying critical maintenance on the community well system to avoid short-term costs, despite his warnings. He showed internal documents and emails, proving her deliberate mismanagement. He explained how my going off-grid, while initially a small factor, had exposed the existing, deeper financial holes that Mrs. Peterson had created. The critical repairs they now demanded money for were the direct result of her long-term negligence. The courtroom gasped. Mrs. Peterson's face went ashen. This was the ultimate low for her deception and mismanagement laid bare for everyone to see. The judge, clearly appalled by the testimony, immediately granted our injunction, halting the assessment. He then ordered a full, independent forensic audit of the HOA's finances, and strongly suggested the immediate removal of the current HOA board members for gross negligence and potential fraud. This was a monumental, a complete victory. As the judge's words rang out, a wave of relief and quiet celebration washed over the courtroom. Neighbors hugged, tears in their eyes. Mrs. Peterson, utterly defeated, stood up slowly, her rigid posture finally broken. She looked completely lost, her empire of control shattered. The two nervous board members quickly distanced themselves from her, their faces reflecting deep concern for their own legal futures. She slowly gathered her things, avoiding eye contact with anyone, her former power evaporated into thin air. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd of Harmony Hills residents cheered. The local news crew was there, eager to capture the moment. I stood among my neighbors, Gus happily wagging his tail beside me. The community, once fractured by fear, was now united, ready to rebuild. The fight had been long and hard, filled with lows of frustration and highs of small victories, but it had culminated in something truly spectacular, the unmasking of tyranny and the resurgence of genuine community. Harmony Hills would need to elect a new HOA board, one dedicated to transparency and true community well-being. The financial mess left by Mrs. Peterson would take time to clean up, but for the first time in years, there was hope. And I, Alex Miller, the man whose water had been shut off, now stood free, truly independent, having not only secured my own peace but, in doing so, helped liberate an entire neighborhood. The HOA had tried to leave me thirsty, but I had gone solar, found my own well, and helped my community find theirs too.